The following tools are considered mainly as the retouching tools in Photoshop: the clone stamp tool, the healing brush and the spot healing brush, the patch tool, the content aware move tool, the red eye tool, and the dodge and burn tools. So let's start with these two first. The dodge tool and the burn tool both has an option called range. And to understand how it works, you should look at it and try it out, all of the shadows, midtones and highlights. But essentially what happens is that if you choose shadows, for example the dodge tool, then that means you will mainly affect the shadows of the image, so it will brighten the shadow details. While if we go back a couple of steps and we choose highlights, then we will affect mainly the highlights on the image. So the shadows will stay the same and mainly the highlights will be brightened even higher up. So this can work almost like a spotlight. And there's another important option called protect tones, which if I turn off and I do the same thing, we'll see the same tool can really burn the details, the highlight details. So we'll get to a stage when it's completely white. And to avoid the clipping in the colors, it's good to have the protect tones turned on. So in that case, we won't burn these details, we will just make them brighter. And you can control the intensity of dodge and burn by using the exposure. But all this happens on the same layer as your image. So all in all, the dodge and burn are destructive changes to our images. But we can reach the same result by using a separate layer and fill that in with 50% gray. I'm just using edit, fill, and choose 50% gray. And set the blend mode of this to overlay or soft light. Once we do that, we can start using the same tools, but the effect will be on a separate layer. So we can see the way it works. Let me just set it back to midtones, and you can see it's a similar effect. Of course, it's not exactly the same effect, but we can reach something very similar effect, but on a separate layer. So we can have a look at the burn tool as well. So let me just select that and change the blend mode to overlay. So if I want to make the neck darker, or maybe this part here darker, then I can draw over it. But all this is on a separate layer, which I can turn off. Probably the most frequently used retouching tool is the clone stamp tool, which has again a couple of important options. First of all, we have a panel for the clone stamp tool, which is called the clone source panel. And it's good to have a look at this panel and go through all its options. Like the clipped, for example, is something that generally comes up in the exam. And that means whenever I sample from an image and I want to copy that, I will see a clipped preview inside the brush of what I'm going to draw. So if I make my brush bigger, I will see more of that sampled image. If I turn off clipped, then I will have a sample which moves together with my brush, but it won't be confined to the edges of my brush. And if I have clip turned back on, I can also turn off show overlay, so there won't be any overlay at all. Or if it's turned on, I can also control the opacity of that overlay. So it doesn't necessarily have to be 100%, it can be less, or even the blend mode of it can be changed. Or if I want to, I can also turn on invert, and then an inverted color version of the preview will be visible. So make sure you check out the clone source panel, but then you should also check out the options here in the options bar. So one of them, which they usually ask in the exam, is the aligned option, which means you can use the clone stamp tool for either single or multiple copies. If it's set to aligned and you sampled already and you start drawing, that means you created one single copy, and whenever you continue drawing until you make a new sample or sample again from the image, it will continue sampling and drawing the same area. If I turn off aligned, that means I will be able to draw as many versions of the same area as I want to. Another important option is the sample option, which can make it possible to work non-destructively with the clone stamp tool, and it also applies to the other retouching tools apart from the patch tool, that you can choose all layers, or in some cases also the current and below, which means that you won't only sample from the current layer, but you can sample from different layers and retouch on a separate layer. So if I create a new layer and I choose sample to all layers, I can still sample and draw even though I'm on the separate empty layer. This option is also available for the smudge tool. So there's also sample all layers option, the blur and sharpen tools, and also the spot healing brush tool and the healing brush tool. In general, the patch, healing brush and spot healing brush tools are best for matching the texture, transparency and shading of the target pixels. So they not only copy and paste like the clone stamp tool, but they also match details. So let me show you the difference. If I use the clone stamp tool and again just copy this detail onto the sky that looks like this, and if I go to the healing brush tool and again sample and draw over the sky, it will not only copy but also match into that new area. So it will match the texture, transparency and shading of the target pixels. And there's one more thing I would like to show you, and that's the content aware move tool, which can be used in two different ways. So if I select this part here in the image and I drag it to the right and I just position it somewhere there, then it will be moved from the left, so the gap will be filled in. The reason for that is because the mode is set to move. Now if I go back and I change this to extend and then I drag the image to the right, then it will be duplicated, but the original one will stay there as well. So remember to go through the retouching tools as well when you are preparing for the exam. Once again, clone stamp tool, healing brush, spot healing brush, patch tool, dodge tool, burn tool, and you can consider these three tools as well as retouching tools, or you can also consider them as drawing tools. I'm going to talk about these in the next video.